I wanted to send off 2023 with highlights from some of your favorite episodes that we have had on Reproductive Rebel this year. This week, we are taking a look at cyclical yoga. I had Leah Shirton on the show earlier this year, and you guys absolutely loved our conversation about cycling yoga practices with your menstrual cycle. So here is a reboot of that incredible conversation. Join me and Leah as we talk about cycle and yoga practices. Hi, I'm Adrienne Irizarry. I'm an Eastern medicine practitioner who is passionate about women's health and helping women live their best lives. My goal is to put you in the driver's seat of your health, offering period solutions for a symptom-free life. Statements made in this program are for educational purposes only and not intended as a substitution for medical consultation or advice. We do not claim to diagnose, treat, or cure any diseases. This podcast is inclusive and welcomes all gender identities. The focus of the program is on biological function, and we will use the term women throughout, but it is referencing physiological and social challenges for biology, not identity. Come as you are, I am happy you're here and welcome all performances of identity. I hope you find something helpful in this show. Welcome back to another episode of Reproductive Rebel. I am so excited today to have yet again the incredible Leah Shirton on the show. If you weren't able to join us for our previous conversation, check out the podcast episode, Trauma and Informed Consent with Leah Shirton. We had an awesome conversation about what it means to have true informed consent, how that makes people feel as they're going in for medical procedures, being seen as a patient, all of those kinds of things. Absolutely check it out. It was a beautiful conversation. And I said at the end of that episode, we were going to have a round two. So here we are. Thank you so much for joining me again on the show, Leah.
Thank you. Yay. I'm so excited to be back. I'm just reliving the last episode and how much fun it was and just talking about how seamless and easy it all came to have that conversation. So really happy to be back.
It was a beautiful conversation. And like I said, if you guys haven't checked out that episode, I would highly recommend it. It was a beautiful conversation. And Leah is a trauma-informed yoga instructor for anyone who doesn't know about Leah's background. And one of the things that drew me to Leah, I found her on Instagram actually because she had this awesome reel that was looking at movement in different phases of the cycle. And so for any of you who've been following the show for a while, you know that last year I did a show on Move with Your Cycle, and I interviewed Rock Hancock, Move Nat Madison. He came on the show. We were talking about things from a weightlifting perspective, strength and conditioning training, and matching that kind of movement with the energetic and hormonal demands of your cycle throughout the cycle. So when I saw Leah's perspective on everything, I'm like, oh, I have a lot of people in my community that do yoga. This would be such an incredible conversation. So I'm really excited Leah is joining me today, and we are going to talk about exactly that. So her expertise is in yoga. She does a lot of her work matching movement with what the body is asking for, whether that is from a cyclical place, whether that is from a movement place, an informed consent place. Like she really meets the body where it's at with this beautiful work that she does. So I'm going to let you talk about it a little bit. Can you tell I'm a little excited that Leah's back to visit today?
Yes. So, oh man, this is a topic that gets me very excited. It's interesting because it's not one that it's not a practice or a style or modality that I was even familiar with until a couple years ago, 2-3 years ago. After I finished my 500-hour teacher training, it was pretty much still the middle of the pandemic. And I was just like hungry to learn. I wanted to take all the trainings. I just wanted to like hunker down in my office and just take every single certification or get every single certification out there. So after that registered yoga teacher training, I took a yoga for women's health training with Yoga Medicine. Yoga Medicine's a really incredible company. They do a lot of trainings for teachers surrounding mental health and nervous system, anatomy, trauma-informed yoga, different ailments and physical, contraindications in yoga and things like that. So once I saw that they were offering this, I was like, well, this sounds incredible because not only can I share this with my students, I feel like I'll learn a lot about myself and my own body in the process. So signed up for that training. It was about a 30-hour training. I dove into the whole thing. It was self-paced and I just kind of like tore through it and then just lived through my notes after that and tried to practice it, individually on my own as much as possible after. But it essentially was a yoga for women's health training from a TCM or traditional Chinese medicine perspective.
So that's awesome.
Oh, it was so awesome. Eye-opening to say the least. So a lot of it at the beginning was just learning about what TCM is, what the philosophy is, learning about how human beings are so intrinsically connected with nature and the elements, how there really needs to be a balance of chi or life force energy throughout the body, yin, yang, all of these things that like I'd kind of heard of here and there through things like acupuncture, yin yoga, even just like traditional Chinese medicine herbs and things like that. But I had never really dove into any of it to learn more. So the fact that this was kind of the foundation of this training felt so right for me because it wasn't taking it from a Western medicine perspective. It was using Eastern medicine, philosophy and principles. So that's kind of where it started. And then it just got into learning about each of the phases and how you can sync movement with those phases, but more importantly, learning about what's actually happening through the body or in the body through those phases, because that's important to know first, right? Like why we're moving this way with this phase, et cetera. So yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, but it's really, like I said, eye-opening once you learn how to kind of tailor your yoga practice or your movement practice to the 4 phases of your cycle. Life-changing.
Absolutely. Tailoring all kinds of movement and the pace of your life in alignment with the 4 phases of your cycle is a total game changer for your immune system, for your sleep, for how strong you feel, how rested you feel when you wake up. If you've been following along, you'll have been through that little mini series that I did at the beginning of the year where, we looked at body literacy 101 in one of the first episodes of this second season of this show. And each episode after that, we did a deeper dive into, well, what's actually happening in your body during menstruation, in the follicular phase, at ovulation, in the luteal phase, and what does that actually mean for you? If you haven't had a chance to check out that series of episodes, these would have been from season 2, episode 2 through the end of this body literacy cycle. I would highly recommend checking them out. It's going to make some of this conversation that I'm having with Leah make a lot more sense if you're not super spun up on the nuts and bolts of how things are working inside of your body during the month. But let's talk through the phases though, Leah. So from your perspective in the work that you do, let's talk about, what does menstruation look like in terms of practice?
Yeah. And I'm so glad that you have these past episodes that people can go back and listen to and review and get like some base knowledge because, yeah, a lot more of this will make sense. And it'll also kind of hopefully be maybe that like last finishing piece to add to whatever you're going to do next. But yeah, so in the menstruation phase, as far as from a movement perspective, I will talk about like kind of just a little bit of what happens. Like I said, like you mentioned, people can go back and review or do their own research, but I'll talk a little bit about what happens in each and then the yoga style that fits best and why that particular style fits best. So we'll start with the menstruation phase because, of course, that's the one that we all love so much. It's such a treat.
It's the one that kicks off our month.
Exactly. So definitely a month kicker
For some people.
Yeah. So the menstruation phase is day 1 of our period, right? Approximately the first 5 days of our cycle. So Some people's periods are significantly shorter, some are significantly longer. When we say average, that is, the average for most people, but really we all are on our own journey here. So it's approximately the first 5 days. So this is the shedding and elimination phase. Obviously we are shedding blood. We're clearing out the endometrium, which is the lining of the uterus, getting ready for fresh growth. Our follicles begin to develop, circulation increases, all the things. So many things happening. There's a reason why it can cause a little bit of discomfort. Just hearing those few things that happen, it's understandable that we don't feel our coziest and our happiest during this time of our cycles or this phase of our cycle. So what we want to concentrate on during the menstruation phase is moving blood. There's a few different ways that we can do that. I'm not going to go too crazy far into TCM, but blood stagnation is something that can cause or something that can exacerbate fibroids, endometriosis, adenomyosis, any kind of issues with pelvic pain. If we're not moving blood in a gentle and safe way, when we're getting that stagnation, it's definitely going to lead to a little bit more pain. So where yoga comes in, and I do want to mention a lot of people, this is a kind of a general, I guess, not opinion, but thought for a lot of women in this phase of the cycle is like, you don't want to move, right? Like you shouldn't move, you shouldn't do anything. That's actually very far from true. So you do want to move your body. You just want to really do it in a gentle way. So the best styles to kind of focus on during this phase are like slow flow yoga, gentle, accessible, anything that's going to offer like a really fluid sequence, movements that are not super exaggerated or that aren't, you don't want to be challenging yourself, but you do want to allow for like an expanding and an opening. So in that style, there are some things that are obviously important to stay away from. Inversions, probably not the best idea. Standing on your head, yes, you can do it. It's probably not going to do anything extremely terrible or add to any issues, but it's easiest to stay away from. So standing on your head, doing even a lot of like downward facing dog, maybe just not as much during this phase. You want to concentrate on like a downward flow of energy. So think like low lunges, modified sun salutations, a lot of floor-based work. So maybe like only standing up a few times. Yogi squat, malasana is a really beautiful posture when you are going through this phase. Things like goddess pose, anything that is offering grounding and that downward flow of energy to allow for blood to circulate, for blood to not get stagnated, for it to move, to keep your uterus warm and things like that. So gentle, slow flow. You could even take a vinyasa class, but just really offer your body modifications and think about maybe moving a little bit slower than you typically would.
Now, would you put yin yoga in that category? It's more fixed in terms
Yeah,
of your positioning.
that's a great question. So yin, and what I learned in this training is yin is safe to do during your menstruation phase, but it is a little bit more beneficial during the follicular. The follicular is technically starts on day 1 of the period as well. So that's where it gets tricky. Like you are technically also in the follicular phase, the day that your period starts. So I think yin is totally fine. It's definitely safe. Obviously, because it's not vigorous movement, you are still offering yourself a lot of gentle space to breathe and to move and to stretch. But because yin gets into that connective tissue and the fascia, that can be, and it really just, this is all case by case, right? It's just kind of an umbrella or a foundation to build on. But typically yin, because it's getting into the connective tissue and the fascia, it can sometimes exacerbate issues with the pelvic floor, really just depending on what yin postures. So maybe staying away from like anything that's going to irritate the SI joint or the psoas or anything that is connected to the pelvic floor. But I think like hip opening yin is great during your period, stuff like that.
Oh, look at that. I learned something new today. Yin has been one of my go-tos during my menstruation phase, and that is really good to know. I wonder if this is why I'm having issues with my psoas.
Oh yeah, the psoas is a sneaky little muscle. It's not actually a little muscle; it's huge, but Oh my God. I feel like a tight psoas has contributed to a lot of my problems, to be
Yeah.
honest. So yeah, I think yin is an absolutely beautiful practice while you are menstruating, but just focusing on specific yin postures and maybe staying away from some other ones.
Awesome. Wow. I learned something new today. I love that.
Yay, we're learning.
I love that. So now in the follicular phase, so to transition into that next phase, you were saying that yin, once you're out of your bleeding days, though, might not be a bad place to go.
Yes. So follicular phase, like I'd mentioned, it actually starts day one of your period. So essentially you're in menstruation and follicular together for as long as you are bleeding. It ends the first day of ovulation. So follicular is actually our longest phase. So that's something that kind of, keeping in the back of our heads can kind of make sense as well. So follicular is our nourishing phase. We're nourishing and invigorating blood. We want to take time for a little bit more stillness and introspection. The development of the endometrium is coming back. Development of follicles is increasing exponentially. So our bodies are doing probably almost a little bit more work during the later half of the follicular phase than it even is doing during the beginning of follicular phase when we're menstruating. So it's such a crazy thing. I never knew the follicular phase technically starts on day one of the period. Had no idea. Thought they were all very separate things, but they really do have such a connection to each other and some overlap too, which makes sense. So yeah, so yin is a beautiful practice during this phase, restorative. Think of follicular as like the springtime of your of your reproductive cycle. It's really when everything is, our bodies had just gone through really kind of a little bit of trauma when we're menstruating. So this is when we're like giving ourselves time to get back to where we want to be. So this is like the beautiful, soft, gentle transition back to maybe more vigorous movement, more challenging movement. So we want to do a little bit less with our energy output. It's a great time for intention setting. Think of like, all of those things you do during like your new moon rituals. Great stuff to do during the follicular phase. A really strong focus on breath work. I didn't mention that during the menstruation phase. That's a great time to focus on some breath work too, especially like diaphragmatic breathing. But follicular restorative yoga. Oh my goodness. All the hip opening restorative yoga. Do it. And do it in your follicular phase. Put your hands on your belly. Allow for like some nice big belly breaths. As far as like actual yoga and movement, think like forward folds, forward bends, side bends, heart closers, hip closers. So instead of like opening up our chest and doing back bends and opening up our hips and, externally rotating through our hips, we're kind of like thinking more of folding in, like going inward, kind of just like curling up and getting cozy with ourselves, if that makes sense. But yeah, the follicular phase, yin restorative, maybe like some yoga nidra, like put on a meditation app, Calm or Insight Timer, do a little guided meditation before bed. A lot of floor-based supine postures, so postures on your back. Don't stand up if you can, if you can go through life that way. Stand up the least amount of time possible. Lots of props. Definitely give yourself a ton of modifications. Just take it slow because your body is really, really rebuilding a lot during this phase.
Mhm. I don't think people give themselves enough runway with
Yes.
the amount of rebuilding that happens. So, like, you know, in our culture, our Western culture, we tend to go hard or go home, and it doesn't matter whether we're bleeding or not.
Yeah.
Well, even if you're one of those people who has kind of naturally been honoring that slowdown during menstruation, and I'm a big advocate for rest when you're menstruating, but balancing that with mindful movement, like you were
Yeah.
talking about. But then by the time you're getting into the follicular phase, like you've just lost a whole bunch of substance. You have to rebuild substance and
Right.
you're preparing substance in
Yeah.
order for all of the young activity that happens in your cycle to happen. Because, just as a quick review, the first half of your cycle is all about yin. It's all about the substance, the fluids, the things,
Yep.
the actual substantive things that prepare us for ovulation, prepare all of the pieces and parts for ovulation to happen. So should fertilization, excuse me, take place, that there's somewhere for it to go to have
Right.
a nice, happy, healthy home. Right.
Right.
So once we've lost all of that substance, there's actually a fairly significant rebuilding process that a lot of times we just don't honor that and we don't give ourselves enough time for that. So, like people who try to resume the normal pace of life by day 5, there's a reason you feel tired. Like,
Right.
giving yourself several days after to nourish your body with blood building foods, to do these types of restorative breathing practices and meditative and supine practices, like you're really giving your body a chance to, yes, you're allowing the movement so that things don't get stuck and stagnant because
Mhm.
anything that's stuck results in pain. But you're allowing the body to really rebuild itself without challenging the resources that you're putting into it because the output is more than what you're putting in.
Yes, absolutely. So well said and so important to remember. Yeah, it's the season of yin is the two first phases of our cycle. It's when we want to be focusing on going inward, passive movement, cooling movement for the most part. Obviously we want to move blood and keep the blood warm, but we also don't want to be pushing our bodies to the point where we're overheating and exhausted and making ourselves bleed more. That is definitely not something that we want to do. So, yeah, it's so interesting because it's different for so many of us. So anything that I mentioned today, I should have made this disclaimer earlier. All of our bodies are so incredibly different. And this isn't going to be easy every single month to follow this exact framework. It's some months it's just not going to happen. But I will say as someone with endometriosis and pelvic pain, when I do follow this as much as I can, I do notice a difference. So, there are times like the holidays or summer or like busier times when it's not going to be super easy for you to be like, okay, I'm bleeding. I can only do gentle yoga. Like that's not realistic.
Uh-huh.
But if you can be mindful about it, if your life allows for that space to be mindful about the movement that you choose, you might see a difference. So yeah, that's my disclaimer. Should have mentioned it before.
Yes, and different body constitutions require different things too, and I'm sure,
Exactly.
with the look at TCM that you had in your training, they covered that as well. Because, for example, somebody who has more of a cold body composition is going to
Yes.
need a little more vigorous movement than somebody who has more of a deficient heat kind of constitution or a yin deficient constitution.
Yes.
So, mindfulness around sweating, like only certain people can do Bikram yoga because for some people it's way too depleting.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
you're absolutely right. This isn't a one size fits all. These are all very much general guidelines of things to be mindful of. And if you have questions about your individual situation, reach out to Leah, reach out to me. There is a free listeners group on Facebook, the Reproductive Rebel podcast listeners group. It's free. Ask questions like that in there.
Hmm.
We want to help support you in terms of finding answers that are going to fit your individual need because everybody's needs are different. But there are some broad generalizations, and these are some of the things that we're covering here. But you're totally spot on in terms of, yes, this is definitely a body by body, circumstance by circumstance kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. As is life, it's going to be different for all of us. But you mentioned yin yang deficiencies. I actually have a great quiz. So if anyone is curious about where their deficiencies or excesses might lie, I have a great quiz that I can offer that might give you a little bit more insight. And we can talk about that a little bit later too. But that was taking that quiz and really going through these questions and noticing these things about myself, also extremely eye opening. So yeah, some of us do need a little bit more, vigorous movement during specific times in our cycle. Some need less. It just really depends on what those are. But leading us into the ovulation phase, also known as the shortest yet happiest, which is probably not a coincidence.
And also not fair.
Not fair at all. Like, who designed this? They are fired. So Oh man. I mean, just unreal. We gotta laugh about it, right? What else are we gonna do?
Exactly.
So ovulation is approximately a week and a half after menstruation, about 2 weeks prior to your next menstrual phase. So it is the shortest phase of our cycle, about 13 to 15 days before the start of your next period. And ovulation really it's like 1 to 3 days for most people. So if you're noticing in the middle of your cycle, you have this like crazy amount of energy and you're feeling a lot of joy and like nothing's really bothering you as much as it typically does, or you want to, you feel drawn to like move your body and like challenge yourself and sweat and just do maybe like movement modalities that you typically don't. Look at your Flow app or check out, if you're kind of figuring it out on your own with your own framework, just you might be ovulating at that particular time of the month. So it's funny. I am currently ovulating right now. And the last like 48 hours, I've practiced power yoga. And I like power yoga. It's not my go-to typically, but I've really enjoyed it. And would I enjoy it in like a week? Maybe not as much. So it does make you think a little bit. So anyway, ovulation. We are in our movement energy phase. Yang energy is officially here. Yang, ovulation, summer, heat, warmth, active, masculine energy. So there is an increase of body awareness, an increase of circulation. Typically, again, this is when we feel our best. We're energetic, we're motivated, we feel inspired, we want to try new things and think outside the box. So this is a great time and energy. Just like take advantage of it. So we're encouraging heat building, moving chi throughout the body, which again is that life force energy, that energy throughout the body. Vinyasa and power are great styles here. Rapid movements to spark that yang energy, full body sequences, full sun salutations, flow classes, but maybe like faster flows. So not a slow flow, more of a traditional vinyasa, ashtanga, power, heart openers, twists, stand on your head as much as you would like. Do all those things. I mean, it's such a great time to feel, like you're most alive with movement and just like go for it. So it's also a really nice time to just like genuinely do whatever feels really good.
Our faces actually get more symmetrical during that time frame, and we're more
Really?
we do, because it's all about
Wow.
attracting a mate.
Oh my, that makes so much sense. That's
Right?
so crazy.
So anybody who needs to have headshots done for work, wait until you're in your ovulation phase.
That is invaluable advice. Wow. I had no idea.
Yeah, we feel like doing these kinds of power yoga, we have lots of stamina and energy and those types of things. We're also more extroverted, our
Yeah.
faces are more symmetrical, like our bodies are saying, "Hey, I'm ready to have a baby." Whether that's your goal or not, that is biochemically what's happening in your system right then. So there's a
Wow.
reason why you have that big burst of energy too. So I just think that's really funny.
Wow. That makes so much sense. Everything seems to fall in line when we're ovulating. Everything's just wonderful. But I will say, that being said, on the flip side, a lot of women have a really difficult ovulation phase. Ovulation can be painful for a lot of people. I have a friend who also struggles with endometriosis, and she actually feels just as much pain as she does during her menstrual cycle or her menstrual phase, sorry, when she's ovulating. So that's something that we need to say as well. I don't want to make it sound like it's flowers and sunshine for everyone. Again, we are just kind of going back to like averages, right? Like what the average person might experience. But please know, if your ovulation phase is not sunny and puppies and rainbows and sunshine, you are not alone.
Well, and also a little note about that as well. I'm glad you brought that up, because when your ovulation phase doesn't present like sunshine and puppies and rainbows, then it actually speaks to an imbalance that's going on inside of the body, because
Yeah.
ovulation is a Jing event. So
Yes.
if there isn't enough energy, enough chi for this event to take place, some women can have worse PMS symptoms and pain and difficulty around ovulation than they do around their period. and it actually speaks to part of the body that needs more nourishment and needs more support.
Yes,
So it's your body's way of waving a flag and saying, "Hey, sister, I need a little bit more help in this particular area." So just,
absolutely.
just to put that out there too, if you're looking to create a little more ease in that phase of your cycle, I think it's really important to know that while you may not be alone, it's also not something to normalize either, because it's your body's way of trying to communicate in a loving way. And it may not feel loving at the time, but in a loving way, and saying, "Hey, I need a little bit more support here."
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's so important to note. I'm glad that we brought that up because it's so different and we don't all have the same lived experience. So, yeah. Leading us into the luteal phase, which is, fun fact, actually two phases in one. There is a early luteal and a late luteal. After ovulation and before our next period is the luteal phase, but the early luteal is real close to ovulation. The late luteal is essentially PMS, which we all know and love. So early luteal progesterone is high. Smaller peaks of estrogen means your energy is still high from ovulation. The late luteal progesterone levels start to drop. So if a pregnancy doesn't occur, this gets us ready for menstruation. So basically, if ovulation does not lead to pregnancy, we're going to get our period again. So our body's getting prepped for that next round. So we all probably can relate to this in our late luteal. We can feel irritable, moody, achy, some bloating and cramps start to come into the mix. We're a little bit more lethargic. We have some crazy cravings. Let us have the chocolate and the ice cream and we will go nuts. It's just natural. So, yeah, so late luteal is basically PMS. So, I like to kind of split the movement between both parts of the luteal because they are essentially one phase, but they're so different and there is such a different need there. So typically like right after ovulation in the early luteal phase, like do a little bit of hatha, keep going with like vinyasas, but maybe not power vinyasas, like start to kind of tone it down a little bit, but also keep taking advantage of the fact that you have energy. Like that's okay to keep moving in a way that feels really good. Once you start to get closer to the late luteal and the PMS starts to come in and your body will definitely tell you it's coming, then we want to really go back to gentle. So getting back to maybe tying in like longer shavasanas at the end of your practice, stopping in the middle of your practice. I mean, that's like my training and my knowledge and practice and intuitive movement kind of comes in here. Like you don't I guess this is another disclaimer. You don't have to do a full 60-minute class. You don't have to do a full 30-minute class. You don't have to do anything. Your body can decide at some point that it no longer wants to give the consent to move. And that's totally okay. In your luteal phase, you might, be working with a little bit of that early luteal energy still while your late luteal starts to slowly come in. And you might notice like, okay, I sort of was fired up at the beginning of this practice and now I'm just like over it. I'm tired. I don't really want to do this. Bring in more props. Yeah. Bring in more props. Grab your blankets. Stop halfway through. Get into child's pose. Stop completely. Get off your mat. Lay down. Do what you need to do to take care of yourself. So I think that's something to remember as well. There's a balance of fast and still in this phase. We want to move and warm the blood during the first half, and then we want to really be taking care of ourselves during PMS. So think about like descending movements in your late luteal. So maybe you're starting in mountain pose, you're starting standing, and you slowly make your way down to seated, and then you slowly make your way down to your back. Think of like descending, getting back from that yang into yin energy. Pranayama, breathwork techniques, giving yourself, again, more space, getting your body ready for all that it's about to do. And like I said, like longer shavasanas, guided meditations, if you're taking a public class and there's a yoga nidra class afterwards or guided meditation or sound bath or something, late luteal is a great time to like stay for that. Get yourself cozy so you're driving home floating on a cloud and just, go to bed and get a good night's sleep. So that is, it's a tricky phase because we can feel really good at the beginning of it and it can sort of nosedive, so to speak. So
Yeah.
it's really, this one's a big listen to your body phase for me.
Absolutely. Because, for some people, that nosedive that you're talking about could happen 7 days prior to,
Yeah.
their cycle coming. For some people, it's 5. A lot of times when things are a little more in balance, like even when somebody is incredibly mindful about their movement and how they're expending their energy during, and not just with exercise, just in general, even when they're super mindful about how they're expending their energy throughout their cycle, it's not uncommon to start seeing that lull start to happen like 3 days before the period starts. You want
Yes,
to
such a
sleep a
lull.
little more. You're a little more introverted. You just kind of don't want to people and stuff, which,
Right.
makes some of those poses like really beautiful because they are very inward in terms of their energy and you can just kind of be.
Yeah, totally. Something I've noticed about myself, I feel like this is pretty relatable in the yoga world as a woman. When I'm in my late luteal phase and I'm, fully in the trenches of PMS, I am I fall into the comparison trap. So if I'm in a public class, taking a public class as a student, I get like kind of pissed at myself if I can't do something. I'm like, oh, my body can usually do this, or like she's doing it, or they're doing, it's just like, this is the phase where like we can get moody and irritable, not just with other people, but with ourselves. And I think that's why I think this is such an important phase for intuitive movement, because that self judgment it's gets a little heavier during the late luteal. So I think that's important to note is like, if you start kind of falling into the comparison trap or just feeling like angry at yourself because your body didn't move the way it did, 10 days ago, that's something to look at. So definitely just take the time to be kind to yourself, say nice things to yourself. Your body is about to go through it. So just settle down. You don't need to be in a competition with anyone, including yourself.
Oh, I'm so glad you said that is such an important point. And it's one of those things that when we don't understand what's going on inside of our bodies, we tend to get into that space and then we get really mad at ourselves and that little critic inside of our head that we're locked in with, right, is the
Yep.
loudest voice that we hear
Oh, yeah.
all the time.
Yeah.
And so, we don't have the ability to hold space for that little
Right.
voice. I had a colleague of mine that referred to the fact that we have the full Pixar emotions cast inside of our head. And I thought it was like the best analogy because it's really true. Like
Yeah.
different emotions and those emotions can actually tell a story about imbalances and point to ways to support your body as well, which I think is really
Yeah.
fascinating. But because I'll have a lot of women who will be like, "Oh, I was really emotional." And I'm like, "Well, hold on a second. Tell me what that emotion was." Because you
Right.
can be emotional, but maybe you felt like a fire-breathing dragon, or maybe you cried at every Hallmark commercial. Like, I don't know,
Right. There's
you
a
know?
wide range of emotions.
Exactly. I'm like, so where does it fall on that spectrum?
Yeah.
And so, that tells a story about what's going on inside your system. But, to your point was such an important one. And I'm so glad you brought it up because we are stuck in our bodies with that little inner critic. And the critic gets a lot louder in this late luteal phase.
Yes.
We can get very whether it is with your yogic practice or in general, like all of this, spirals out into life, right? It's really important to honor that voice.
Absolutely. There is so much to be said for just if you're in the act of moving when these thoughts come up, there's so much to be said for just like stopping. We live in this society and this like movement and fitness world where it's like, if you start, you get to the end. There
Yep.
is an end. You have to, there's an end result. You got to get to it. This is the phase where like, I want to smash that. I want to throw it off a bridge. I'm so over that mentality. And this
Yeah.
is a phase where your mind will naturally kind of go in that direction. Like you have to finish, you have to do this, it has to look this way. It has to be this amount of time. It has to be this style. And I think it's just sitting with that and recognizing that your thoughts aren't real. They're just thoughts. They're not reality. And just, yeah, for me, it's a real tricky emotional time in my cycle. And I just wanted to mention that because I feel like as women, it's pretty common to just have that, like you said, inner critic kind of come out when you're PMSing. And as it relates to movement, just don't listen to it as much as you possibly can. It's a great time for child's pose. Just get into child's pose on your mat. Let everybody around you do the crazy stuff. Take a minute for yourself to just come back to center. That's so important.
I love that. I love that. Such an important point, my friend. Well, I want to be sensitive to your time because I know you're a busy lady. So how can people find you?
Yes, thank you. So I am on Instagram at happy.body.yogi. That's pretty much the only platform, I guess, that I'm on. There's so many of them, and I know maybe I should be on more, but Instagram is me. That's where I'm at. Definitely feel free to reach out anytime. I love chatting to people on there, and I love when people reach out and, tell me their stories or ask me questions, and we can get into like a real long chat. Feel free to give me your number. I'll ask you for your number. Let's take it to, whatever level it needs to go to. It brings me so much joy and fills me up to actually help people in this way. And I hope that resonates. But yeah, that's where I am.
Oh, absolutely. It totally resonates. And I knew I loved you from the moment I found your reel. And
Same.
and, the more we talk, the more I love what you do. I love the beautiful energy that you bring to it, the wisdom that you bring to it. And I'm so grateful that you brought the wisdom back to the show today. We may have to do this again because I know there's tons of topics that we could talk about with our mutual backgrounds.
Yes. Thank you so much. Yeah, this kind of work fills me up, and I just love talking with people like you, like-minded people who where we feel a purpose and we're trying to live it and get the word out about all these things. And honestly, let's be real. Being a woman is not easy. It's not, it's just not. And that's okay. And we are here to support each other. Ultimately.
Absolutely. Yeah. A rising tide lifts all boats. And that's exactly why this program exists, because, just the piece where you were talking about the difference between the early luteal and the late luteal, like a lot of people don't know that kind of thing. And it absolutely changes the frame in terms of how you feel about yourself, how you feel about your work, the way you engage with people around you. Like once you understand, oh, this is why I feel this way, you feel less shame around it. You're able to work through it. You're able to communicate your needs better. Like it changes the game. So I'm so grateful for the work that you do and that you join me again on the podcast. If any of you would like to talk about this episode or other episodes, please join us in the free Facebook group, the Reproductive Rebel podcast listeners group. There is a link in the show notes. And as always, thank you so much for joining us. If you are interested in learning more information about the basics around your cycle, be sure to check out our course, Body Basics, in the Tao of Women Institute. If you already know these basics, but are looking for a little bit of a deeper dive into the energetics and seasonal changes that take place inside your body, not just outside the window, you will want to check out our course, Not Your Mama's Menstrual Course. Both of these are incredible supports to this beautiful conversation that I had with Leah today, and will serve you in terms of planning your work and your play to the best of your ability around your cycle. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Reproductive Rebel. Reproductive Rebel is recorded by certified peri-steam hydrotherapist and acutonics practitioner, herbalist, and Chinese nutritional therapist, Adrienne Irizarry of Moon Essence LLC. If you are interested in setting up an appointment for one-on-one support, ordering from our store, or checking out our course offerings, visit our website at moonessence.life. Be sure to subscribe to our newsletter and get insider information on upcoming events and offerings. Join the conversation. Like and follow us at Moon Essence Me on Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn. Your voices make this program possible. Thank you all for your continued support.